Hello you lovely cubs, it's the Dragon Lord here, back again with another video. Another part of What If Luffy Was Sent Back in Time, Part 4. Now if you guys haven't already, do like and subscribe, and if you haven't already, join the Discord and the Roblox group, they're the top links in the description. With that out of the way, let's get into it.
I'm up now, 20,000 on a bus down, I'm on my way, I'm going up now, and I ain't never gonna touchdown. I ain't never gonna touchdown. No, I ain't never gonna touchdown.
The crew had a goal, Kokoyashi Village. It was time for Luffy to fulfill his promise to Nami, the promise of freeing her village. Back when they met in Orange Town, they had discussed this, and well, that's the entire reason she joined the crew in the first place. Luffy and Nami had discussed plans for a bit, and it came to a conclusion that they would drift out at sea for about a week, and then use half a week of time to get to Kokoyashi Village. This was not only to get Zoro back into tip-top shape, but also to train the crew, because Luffy decided that he might as well. He knew of things that the crew didn't, and it might be best to train them. Or at least train with them. Fighting them would also improve them after all. Zoro didn't want to be left out. He was still conscious, even though he had been severely wounded by Mihawk. He was actively getting treated by Nami, so his recovery time was around 2. As his wound had practically been fixed up right away, he didn't lose that much blood. And well, with Nami there, she could help him out constantly, because she knew what she was doing. However, Zoro was still distressed. 2 days of training would be a lot to miss out on, especially if Luffy was giving the training. After all, Luffy was immensely powerful. To be able to clash toe-to-toe with Mihawk, the world's strongest swordsman, wasn't a feat anybody could do. Even Nami was well aware of that, and she admired him for that a bit, and she knew that he could keep her promise. So Luffy decided to have an easy bit of training first. For 2 days he would explain the basics of Haki. However, he made it very clear that there needs to be a base foundation for Haki, as it would only really apply if they were already strong. For example, Luffy took Zoro as the main example. He said if Zoro could, for example, cut steel with a steel blade, then if he used Haki on top of that, he could cut stuff that was way stronger, like maybe diamond. He made an over-exaggeration, but the crew got the point across. They needed to first work on their own strength, and then maybe learn Haki. Luffy kept explaining, however, that it was definitely a power that everybody in the Grand Line used, which the Grand Line was their goal, so they'd eventually have to learn it anyway. The explanations Luffy gave were the explanations he had gotten from Rayleigh. These were deeply engraved in his mind and he would never forget them, but he didn't stop there. He instantly wanted to take them to the next level, the level of advanced armament which he had learned from Hyogoro. Zoro asked a lot of questions, as well did Usopp. Sanji, however, seemed a bit uninterested, though he still paid attention from time to time. Even Nami was paying attention. The explanations Luffy gave didn't really sound like Luffy. It was too smart to be Luffy. And it wasn't necessarily the easiest to grasp, but if they kept at it, they would unlock it. At least that was the mentality the crew had. However, Zoro, who was asking a lot of questions, was asking questions like how to cut steel. He had heard this from his master before, but he had never actually done it. This was something that, if he learned how to do it, would massively improve him. The rest of the training is basically just light spars between Luffy and the crew members receiving the training. This was good learning experience for them as Luffy was immensely powerful, but each spar made the person fighting Luffy a lot stronger. That's just the potential they had, and Usopp really showed this as well, as he was using his brains rather than his brawn. In these 2 days, Usopp also made a gadget for Nami. It was more or less a battle staff, but it had a few functions which were basically just gas, which would lead to fire, and a bubble blower to confuse the enemy. But for the rest, it was just a simple battle staff, nothing like the weapon he had made her in the past. Learning a lot from Luffy, Usopp decided that he should not burden himself to the crew. So he decided to make more gadget, more bombs, stuff like that. Just started tinkering for the 2 first days. He tinkered even when listening to the explanations Luffy was giving about hockey, simply because he couldn't waste time. And he made a few new ammo types that would really be helpful in his fights that were to come. The first 2 days of training passed and Zoro got up. He was better than before, but the wound could still reopen if he wasn't careful. So he started training, and he pushed himself like usual, but he got beat by Nami on the head if he pushed himself too far. The 3rd day of training, the crew actually stopped at an island, and they made some purchases, especially some steel plates and a few strawmen. Luffy had asked Usopp, who was good with tinkering and making stuff, to make these strawmen into metal strawmen, which he could then use to train them, which Usopp did. They had a total of 5, with some extra spare materials if they needed to fix them up. This was for their training, so they didn't really care about the cost, and Nami actually ended up paying for it, which was surprising to Luffy, yet it showed her great dedication to at least beating Arlong, which he remembered. Everybody started training with their dummies after they finished their tasks. Of course, some people, like Usopp and Sanji, were busy with other things, and Nami was always navigating, so she couldn't really always train. But they still trained. It was really only Luffy and Zoro who kept training, with Luffy not really using his scarecrow at all. Basically just training with Zoro whenever the time shone. He would activate his haki whenever Zoro attacked him. This was simply to get Zoro's technique on a higher level, as it wasn't really to train him in haki, it was more or less to get him used to using one sword. He currently only had one. After all, his other one was half broken, and the other one was completely shattered. There was nothing he could do with that. The village they had stopped by also didn't have any good swords. They had basically only rusty swords because it was such a peaceful town. They had 10 more days before they would arrive in the first place, so they would have 7 days of proper full training and then 3 days of traveling whilst training to balance it out. In this time, the crew kind of progressed a lot. It wasn't an astronomical value, but they were definitely a lot stronger than before. Especially Zoro, who basically constantly fought Luffy. He was somebody who got stronger with the thrill of battle, and fighting Luffy over and over again, somebody who was much stronger than him, was really a learning experience, and it opened up his eye a bit. In this time he had also caught glimpses of haki, but not as much as when he fought Mihawk. It was more or less a feeling, and not something he could grasp yet. He knew that he'd need at least a year of proper training with this if he wanted to use it correctly. Out of everyone, really, Nami and Usopp showed a lot of growth as well, which was quite surprising. Nami was not so scared at fighting anymore as she sparred with Luffy, and Usopp seemed entirely different. He had an entire battle gear created just for himself after taking Luffy's advice. Luffy had simply told him that he has a brain and that he should be using it more than his muscle. That muscle and all that came after. That for now he should focus on getting stronger equipment and also just a stronger sense for battle. So the spars he did with Usopp were more or less showing him what he should and should not do, because Usopp never really had that training in the past. Same with Nami, although Sanji and Zoro were pretty much fine on that regard. They were approaching closer and closer to Kokoyashi village and the Koko Islands. Nami was trembling, she was stressing out, but Luffy simply put a hand on her shoulder, which calmed her down. She didn't know why, but she felt like she could trust Luffy no matter what. They get really close to the islands, and then a sea cow shows up. Luffy recognizes this sea cow, but the others get a bit scared. However, Luffy uses his Conqueror's Haki, and the sea cow starts trembling, and it instantly listens to the commands Luffy gives it, as it starts towing the Going Merry to get closer and closer to the island. They end up stopping at one island. Nami is shocked. The island they stopped at had a village on it, Gosa Village. However, the entire village was upturned and just destroyed. The sea cow quickly takes this chance to leave as two fishmen are approaching. Luffy steps up, but he gets stopped by Zoro and Sanji, saying that they should get some training in before the big fight. As they rush at the fishmen, they both get knocked out by Zoro and Sanji, easily even. The fishmen posed no real threat to them, although they were just rookie fishmen, says Nami. A woman who sees this approaches them. At first they're wary, but then Nami reveals that this is her foster sister, Nojiko, and Sanji instantly falls in love as he starts praising her as a goddess. However, he gets snapped out of it by Zoro. This sparks a bit of anger in Sanji as he calls him a mosshead, and their rivalry began. She's happy to see Nami with people for the first time. She looks truly happy, and then she decides to invite them over to the house that they were both raised in. Nami's a bit embarrassed, but, well, she ends up joining and saying that they should go. They go, and there they find a few oranges and an orange plant. It's a bit surprising to the crew, but Luffy knew this place. In fact, he had a bit of attachment to it. After all, this was where his navigator joined him permanently. They hear her sad story about their foster mother, Belmare, and they get offered some tea, which they all drink. And then they eat a few oranges, as that's pretty much the only food that Nojiko has at this point, but Luffy graciously accepts it, and so does the rest of the crew, as they eat quite a lot of oranges. Whilst the crew and Nojiko are talking, Nami pulls on Luffy's sleeve as they go outside, and she reveals her treasure to him. She says that he can have this as long as he promises to keep the promise they made. She knew that he was strong enough to beat Arlong. After all, he went toe-to-toe with a warlord of the sea. That's not something anybody could do. And in fact, even in training, she had seen how strong he was. Sanji and Zoro were pretty much already superhuman, and seeing them go all out and still struggle that immensely towards somebody like Luffy was insane. He might not have been the smartest tool in the shed, but he wasn't the dumbest either. At least that's what she thought, so she wanted her money to go to Luffy. After all, he was the captain. Luffy simply tells her to use the money how she wants. It's her money. Plus, he says that she's the ship's financer and the crew's financer, so if she doesn't want to use it for herself, she should invest it in the crew's strength, taking Zoro's swords as an example. She smiles and says that she will, but that she might add an interest rate just for fun, which Luffy laughs about, thinking that that was such a Nami move to do. He hadn't realized, but he matured a lot. He was still the happy guy who laughed and cheered with his crew, but he had his very serious moments too. This was partly due to him having lived over 30 years in life, but also because he tormented himself a lot, thinking back to his crew's loss against Kaido and the regret he felt, saying that he didn't want that. So he matured a lot, and he wasn't really as dumb as he used to be. He was still pretty dumb, but thinking back of most of the things that his crew did and their behavior, he learned a lot from them, and it really showed. Thinking back to the moment he used a bird to get to land, it was obvious that he wasn't the dumb guy he was before. He at least had a few tricks up his sleeve. The crew, after stuffing their bellies, has this wave of exhaustion over them. Luffy thought about it and it made sense. They had been non-stop training since trying to get here, so he decided they would take one day to rest and recover. After all, Zoro was still pretty much recovering from his wound. It wasn't as bad as before, or back in the time when they originally attacked Arlong. It was a lot better due to Nami's treatment, but it could still open up if he got a severe attack, and that's what made Luffy worry. So the crew took some rest. At night, Luffy, however, went out. He wanted some fresh air and decided to walk off to the cliffside where he could look out to sea. He got followed by Nami, who, well, pointed him out to a place. He followed her and they ended up arriving at a gravesite. She talked about her foster mother, and although she wasn't her real mother, she talked about her like she was her hero, and how she wanted to be like her. Nami then started talking about her goals of wanting to make a map of the entire world. Something nobody had done before, but it was definitely not a small feat. This would be something that would be really hard to do, and she would require a crew that was immensely powerful to join her. Luffy says that he will accompany on her goal. After all, his goal was to become the king of the pirates, so if she followed him, she would surely already have her goal pretty much mapped out. At this point, Nami starts to cry, as she berates herself for being part of Arlong's crew, revealing the tattoo she had on her arm. She was carrying a dagger as she started stabbing at it, saying how annoyed she is with herself, and how she wishes that somebody like Luffy had approached her way before. He stopped her as he put his straw hat on her head, as he then bandaged up her arm. He thought about it, and something like this had happened before. The memory was a bit fuzzy, but he remembered that this exact thing had happened, but just not in the same place. This made Luffy think that events of the past would definitely happen again, over and over, that something like this wouldn't stop here, and that he would probably meet his fellow old crewmates in the same ways he did before, which he didn't mind at all. He would actually like to relive those adventures a bit, but maybe change it up a few things. Then a shocking memory came to his mind. That's right, Ace. He remembered this, but right now there was nothing he could do, plus it didn't really matter right now. He comforts Nami, and then they both go back inside, as they go back to rest. The next morning, a marine shows up. A lot of marines. Nami and Nojiko are outside at the time get approached, and Nami gets accused of harboring illegal money. She then gets held at gunpoint by some of the lower-ranked marines, and then Luffy goes outside. He sees this and he diverts the attention. Now the marines get scared because this is Luffy, the boy who got a 30 million berry bounty when he was only around 8 years old. Not only that, but intel suggested that he went toe-to-toe with someone like Mihawk a while ago, which made them all scared, as this was only intel that was revealed a short while ago. The Marines point at Luffy with their guns, but Luffy simply sends them all flying with a Gum-Gum bazooka. He felt like they weren't really worthy of using Conqueror's Haki on. Plus, if he didn't really use his other moves, he would go stale. Genzo quickly shows up, as he is agitated by the fact that Arlong didn't keep his promise. Well, he's agitated because Nami is agitated, and he knew the promise between the two, which not many people knew. He spoke out in a loud voice, saying that he would rile up the villagers and they would attack Arlong. Yet Luffy interfered. He stopped them all as he said that he would take care of it, as the rest of the crew, Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, and Nami prepared themselves to go out. However, Genzo is adamant. This was their fight. This was their time to stage a rebellion against their oppressors. However, Luffy once again tells him to just sit down and wait. Yasoku and Johnny, who were there as well, decided to hand over their swords to Zoro. They had seen the training the Straw Hats had gone through and knew that they were now on an entirely different level. They wouldn't be of much help. But they stuck around the crew because they were actually headed in the same direction as they were on a bounty mission. They handed over their swords, telling Zoro to give them back after he was finished with them. He evaluated the swords and he knew that they weren't of bad quality, and that they were actually of better quality than the swords he used. He thanked them and then he headed out with the rest of the crew. Luffy was walking up front, with Zoro and Sanji to the left and right of him. Usopp and Nami were behind them, a bit more scared, but they were also willing to go into battle. They arrive and Luffy kicks down the two massive gates holding the park closed from the village. Arlong and the other fishmen are surprised, and he gets a bit mad. He then sees Nami and tells her that she did a good job bringing her pirates that he could sell into slavery, or just use as workers. But Nami yells out, saying that she's leaving the Arlong pirates, and that she will beat Arlong together with her crew to take back Kokoyashi village. Arlong and the other fishmen start laughing, as one of the lower-ranked fishmen in Arlong's crew goes up to Nami and tries to take her to Arlong. The others let this happen because, well, Nami knocks that fishman out in one fell swipe. She had gotten quite good at using the pole as a battle staff, and not only that, it was also due to her training with Luffy. She hadn't noticed it, but her physical strength had gone up quite a lot. Not only that, but she was insanely intelligent, so she could see where to strike and where it would have the most effect. She had been testing this out on Sanji and Usopp, who were more than willing to train with her, as she knew where to hit and make it hurt. Although the fishman she had knocked out was one of the lowest ranked in Arlong's crew, he was still a fishman and nothing to joke about. So Arlong got quite agitated. He told her if she didn't come now and bow down that he would kill her and her measly crew, which was actually Luffy's crew, but he had misinterpreted and thought that she made a band to rebel against him. Luffy stepped up, however, and then Arlong recognized him. This was the guy the Marine had warned him about, that if he ever ran into him, he should probably run, or just stop fighting. Arlong, however, thought that the Marines were joking and was just laughing it off. As he asked Nami, "Did you really join a pathetic crew like this?" Which made her cry out in anger as she called Luffy's crew the strongest. Kurobi, one of the fishmen who were there and who specialized in karate, came up. However, Sanji stopped him and came face to face with him. As he was inching for a fight with Kurobi would attack using his fishman karate, however Sanji just blocked it using his legs, and even kicked Kurobi in the face. Much to the fishman's surprise, Sanji was out of his league. Or so he thought, and then he looked at the water. He jumped in and Sanji jumped in after, forgetting that fishmen are stronger in the water. Yet they were still pretty equal inside of the water, as their fight continued underwater. Hachan and Chu also stepped up, but they got intercepted by Zoro and Usopp, who fought them. Usopp and Chu started fighting, and Chu would use his spit to launch it at Usopp, kind of like a sniper would, but Usopp would intercept them and shoot his own bullets at them, which would basically collide and make a draw. So now it was basically who could shoot faster and who was more accurate. What Chu failed to realize, though, was that Usopp was basically leading him into a trap, as he led him through the village, slowly but surely. Chu would keep firing, however at a certain point he stepped on something. He looked down and he saw a circular disc. As Usopp basically gloated and said, "Gotcha," and then the disc blew up, with Chu right there. He wasn't severely hurt from the debris, but the explosion definitely burned his skin. This irritated him as he went into rapid fire mode, however it was already too late. He hadn't seen that Usopp had already fired multiple shots at him before, and each one of these looked different. They were red instead of the black bullets he was using before. They all hit Shu and then exploded, leaving him to be burnt. He then passed out in the middle of the street, where everybody saw it. The villagers cheered, and Usopp would have to make his way back to the crew. Meanwhile, whilst the fight with Usopp and Shu happened, Hachan and Zoro were having their fight. They were fighting with Hachan using his 6 sword style, however, Zoro training with Luffy had increased his observation, so Hachan using 6 blades was no problem, as Zoro would simply intercept them. He still had to be careful, but his movement was so swift, he intercepted all of Hachan's blades, and then used a Tatsumaki to finish him off. Zoro had the easiest time of everyone, but that was because he didn't let Hachan get into the water, or let Hachan get into his best fighting condition. He finished the fight quick. Right after Zoro finished his fight, Kurobi would fly outside of the water into the air, followed by Sanji, who would kick him down into the ground, creating a small crater, then safely landing next to it. Arlong was a bit scared, but he was the strongest of his crew. He would easily defeat these scrubs, however Luffy approached him. He hadn't realized it, but Nami and Luffy had taken care of the rest of the weaklings. Luffy had made all the weakest people pass out using his Conqueror's Haki, and Nami knocked the others out with her battle staff, mostly hitting them in vital points like the neck or the stomach, which was extremely effective. She would even use the fire sometimes, burning some of the fishmen, which then got knocked out by Luffy afterwards. Luffy approached Arlong, and Arlong, who was trembling, decided to have a one-ditch last attack, or at least take down Luffy with him. He would try and bite Luffy, however, his teeth would shatter upon impact. This was due to Luffy activating his armament haki. Luffy would then kick Arlong, sending him flying into the building, which then led to him following after. He found a study room. Now he remembered that this was the study room Nami used to work in. He quickly destroyed it, using his punches to destroy it and using his kicks to destroy it as well. Arlong was filled with anger, and outside, Nami could only help cry. Arlong rushed at Luffy with anger, but he got knocked down by one of Luffy's punches. Then Luffy extended his foot upwards, right above Arlong, who tried to get up really quickly. However, his foot, which had turned into his signature attack that destroyed the castle last time, came down at crashing speeds, knocking Arlong out and destroying Arlong Park. After the rubble cleared, Luffy yelled out that Nami was his friend and that anybody who threatened his friends would get beat down by him. Nami starts crying, and at that point, she decides to never abandon Luffy ever. The Marines who were there then captured Arlong and his crew. They didn't get a few people, but they at least got Arlong. The crew decided to leave, as they had to head to their next destination, which just so happened to be Loketown. As they were leaving, Kokoyashi village thanked them, and Nami ended up giving a portion of her treasure to the village to rebuild it. They waved their goodbyes and they set sail. It would take them at least 2 weeks, maybe even more, to get to Loketown, so they had to make a few stops at other villages to buy supplies along the way, but this was a perfect time to continue their training. Not only that, but in this time a bird would fly over the ship and drop something. Looking at it, it was newspapers. This was quite confusing, but then there were also wanted posters along it. One of them was Luffy's, and his bounty had explosively grown to a 170 million berry bounty. 30 million got added because he defeated Arlong, and he beat the Marines. But that wasn't all. Another 110 million berry was added, as he had fought Mihawk, and the people in charge decided that it would be best to increase the bounty to get people to go after Luffy. This was tremendous because this meant that his third issued bounty, which was mostly his second, as the second was only used to update his picture, but this meant that his third was a huge increase from what it was in the past. It wasn't quite his 1.5 billion, but this was fine too. He was content. Next stop, Loketown. But that is a story for the next part. Anyway, if you guys did enjoy this What If, do like and subscribe. And if you haven't already, join the Discord and the Roblox group as I keep advertising. And with that out of the way, my name's the Dragon Lord, and I'm signing out.